Welcome to the Choral Connection, a series of interviews with musicians with whom Maestro Harold Rosenbaum has collaborated over his 47-year international conducting career. We hope you are inspired by their artistry and the stories they have to tell. For more about the series, please visit www.haroldrosenbaum.com.
Welcome, everybody. Today, I have the great pleasure of introducing and talking to a good friend, Grammy Award-winning composer Richard Danielpour, who has a distinctive American voice, and whose music is of large and romantic gestures, brilliantly orchestrated, deeply emotional, and rhythmically vibrant. His first opera, Margaret Garner, written with Nobel laureate Toni Morrison, took critics and audiences by storm when it premiered to sold-out houses in Detroit, Cincinnati, and Philadelphia. Before I continue, obviously you can read much more about Mr. Danielpour online. Mr. Danielpour has received many prestigious honors, such as a Lifetime Achievement Award and the Charles Ives Fellowship from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, a Guggenheim Award, 2 Rockefeller Foundation grants, a Burns Prize from Columbia University, and grants and residencies from the Barlow Foundation, MacDowell Colony, Yaddo, Copeland House, and the American Academy in Rome. His work has been performed throughout the world, and his commissions read like a who's who of the world's leading musical institutions and artists. He has written for example, the New York Philharmonic Philadelphia Orchestra, Orchestra Nationale de France, Stuttgart Radio Orchestra, Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center, Santa Fe Chamber Music Festival, American Composers Orchestra, and San Francisco, Pittsburgh, Pacific, National, and Baltimore Symphonies, among many others. His music has also been championed by Yo-Yo Ma, Jesse Norman, Dawn Opshore, Emmanuel Axe, Frederica Frontstadt, Thomas Hampson, and Gary Graffman, and conductors like Leonard Bernstein, Kurt Mazur, Charles Dutoit, David Zinman, and Leonard Slatkin, and many others. Mr. Danielpour has also composed 2 major scores for the New York City and Pacific Northwest ballets. Mr. Danielpour is one of the most recorded composers of his generation and became only the 3rd composer after Stravinsky and Copland to be signed to an exclusive recording contract by Sony Classical. Well, welcome, Richard. We go way back. I remember once you invited me to your apartment, and I forget what the occasion was. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, we were, it's so interesting. We were talking about a piece that I eventually wrote in 2017. I was actually thinking of writing a Passion Oratorio in Hebrew and English, taking the original story of Jesus's last hours on earth and bringing it back to its Jewish origins. In essence, going back to the earliest days of Christianity, before Roman Catholicism made it a politicized religion. And we were talking about this, and I went through many incarnations of design with that piece, but I finally and we were talking about it, and you were asking me whether it could be small or large. I finally in 2016 started writing it. And I wrote it for the Oregon Bach Festival, and the Buffalo Philharmonic commissioned it. We also did it in Los Angeles. And Joanne Folletta recorded it with an extraordinary cast. Hila Plitman, Janae Bridges, Matthew Worth, and a number of others. And we were very fortunate just a few months ago to receive 3 Grammy nominations for it. Wow. So it's probably going to be one of the works, I'm guessing, that will stand in the forefront of my catalog when this is all over.
Well, I heard it was fantastic, and I know Joanne's work very well.
She's amazing. She is just so amazing. And the thing is, we often think of people we've known as they were 30 years ago. We don't realize what they've become in our present day and our present moment. But Joanne has become a true maestro. She is, I mean, we were in school together at Juilliard, right? And she was incredibly gifted then, right? In fact, there was a story when, I don't know if you know this, but she tried, I think, 3 times to audition for Juilliard and they wouldn't take her because they were averse to taking a female in the 80s, right?
Oh, still then, that's
Oh, it was horrible. And I mean, and evidently the assistant dean had said, "Why are you wasting your time? You know this isn't going to happen." You
oh,
know, and so I think the story was that it was either that she auditioned the 4th time or the 3rd time, but she blew everybody away so badly they had to take her. And so the fall of her first year, Mr. Bernstein, who later became one of my teachers in the last 3 years he was alive, this was 1983, mind you. He came and she was conducting the overture to Carmen, and in the whole school was in 309, room 309 in Juilliard, and they had not appointed yet Joseph Polisi. There were because Peter Menon had passed away earlier that year, and he knew all about what had happened.
oh,
And he stopped her and he looked at the dean and he said, "How long did it take for you to figure out how important she is?"
that's great.
And I love that moment. It's one of my favorite moments of all the time I spent at Juilliard.
Well, I'll be very brief, but I want to tell you I knew her before you because I was in charge of the summer session music department at Queens College in the late 70s, and I hired her to start a summer orchestra. She asked me if there was funding, and yeah. So, and I also saw her guitar recital. But enough about her. I want to talk about you. You.
Good.
So what was it about serial music and your engagement with that style that caused you to back away from it?
You know, in my early days at Juilliard, and also even as an undergrad, where I was a double major as a pianist and composition student and piano student at New England Conservatory, my teachers were pushing very hard, the idea of not only serial music, but always achieving the total chromatic in one's work. And I took it very seriously. And wanting to be a good student, I listened to them. And of course, when you're at Juilliard and you're, even though my main teacher was Vincent Persichetti, I would meet occasionally with Milton Babbitt and Elliott Carter. And when you're in the presence of those guys, you want to consider what they're doing very seriously.
Mhm.
And I did for the first 3 of the 6 years that I was at Juilliard. And all of a sudden, I just realized that it was very limited in its ability to have a wide palette of evoking a wider palette of emotional and visceral response. I felt it was one brick in the building rather than the entire building, if you see. And then, of course, I started to study Turn of the Screw of Britten, which is a tonal 12-tone opera. And I studied Agon, which is a tonal 12-tone ballet, right? And I realized that the answer, as Mr. Bernstein would often say, is letter D, all of the above. You can include everything. It's like, I think, minimalist composers have focused on one particular way. They're almost like specialists. They focused on one way of making music, right? Messiaen and Stravinsky were doing this often, creating a sonic design by the use of particular forms of repetition, right? I also do that in my music all the time. So does Bach, right? That's a through composed work in which the rhythm is the same throughout and the chords are changing at their own rate. It's not all that different from what John Adams was doing in his early days, you see. It's just that the rate of change is a little faster than what John Adams was doing. So my way of looking at this is, and I think this was very much also the influence of Mr. Bernstein, who said that, that kind of music, serial music, creates a particular kind of climate when you need it, right? It's one it's one color in the palette of the composer's paint collection. And so in that way, I started to see it more and more that way. Um, I should also say that as I have gotten older, my music on the surface has become simpler, and underneath the surface, it's become far more complex. You see, so as I've gotten older, I've developed a deeper admiration for composers like Mozart, who's the master of the surface being simple, but what's underneath it being complex.
Right.
Or Aaron Copland or Claude Debussy. You know, these are composers who are very transparent on the surface,
And
but what's underneath the surface is quite complex. Whereas with somebody like Elliott Carter, the surface is incredibly complex, but
Right.
what's behind it is incredibly simple.
That's interesting. And he said that, and he knew that his music was not, especially the vocal music, was not something that's going to appeal to a lot of people during his lifetime, but he hoped afterwards it would be.
Well, you know, Elliot, he was such a kind man, a wonderful person. And toward, you know, I mean, the fact that he lived to be, what, 103, you know, what's interesting is that toward the end of his life, his music, the edges in his music got a little softer, and he became a lot more interesting to me, because there was more variety. You know, I think in a way there's not that much difference when you really look at it between Elliott Carter and Philip Glass, because it's the same sound for 20 minutes basically. The sound doesn't change. Whereas if you were to listen, for instance, to the Bartók Third Piano Concerto or to the Corleone First Symphony, the material is it's a very small amount of material, but the variety of events and the changes and the dramatic shifts that occur never allow you to feel like you're hearing the same thing all the way through.
It's like the Corleone Clarinet Concerto, which I just heard recently. Man.
Yeah. What a great work. What a great, he is, you know, John and I have been friends for 34 years.
Mm-hmm.
And he's been almost like an older brother to me in some respects. And I have to say, I know of no other composer by name or in person who I consider as great a living artist as he is when it comes to composition.
Yeah, he's amazing. One work after another. And my wife took him when she went to Lehman College. I think it was 51 years ago. He taught a Beethoven course there. So we go way back. Just one more thing about Elliott quickly. Elliott Carter, from 1938 to 1954, approximately, he wrote only tonal music, at least choral. And
I played his piano sonata. I know.
And it's, you know, even then, and also Milton Babbitt, he wrote a piece in 1938 called "Music for the Mass," and it's tonal, but it's every moment of all those works are brilliant. Anyway, back to you again. Can you tell us what it is like to envision a project, perhaps emanating from a commission, and the process of writing a new work for you? Does it flow like Bach? Is it more like Beethoven's struggle, or something in between?
It's a great question. You know, I've been blessed. I'm so grateful to be alive. I just had my 65th birthday, and I feel, because I've gone on since the pandemic, which is now almost a year old, I've gone on a kind of a radical health regime in which I feel 10 years younger. You know, I've lost a lot of weight. I feel I've become stronger, more resilient. And my diet is completely different. I have asthma, but I haven't had an asthma attack since last March.
You took out dairy, is that it?
What's that?
You eliminated dairy?
I eliminated everything acidic from my diet. Everything acidic. I'm not drinking coffee anymore. I'm drinking only Japanese tea. I'm not drinking any alcohol, as much as I missed it the first month. I'm not having any sugar, and I'm not having anything with yeast. I have bread, that's sourdough bread with no yeast, and it's made a world of difference. And it's reduced all the inflammation in me, which is great. But in all those 65 years, and where I really, my first commission was almost exactly 40 years ago. 40 years and 4 months ago, and 138 commissions later, I'm still standing, and just really just feel so lucky. Every time I wake up, I'm so blessed. I'm writing, I'm writing my second full-length opera right now, and at the same time, I'm writing a work for Skidmore College for Eric Owens and Janae Bridges with the poetry of Rita Dove that has to do with what it what it feels like to be an African American person in the U.S. It's a pretty intense work for two singers, two pianists, and a cellist. And you know, I just feel grateful every day I wake up. But to answer your question, when I begin thinking about a work, I think like an architect. In the very beginning, I daydream my music in the very beginning. And I think about the shape of the entire work as if I'm surveying it from a distance. And when I feel, and very often, because half of my work is with text, because I've written half of my catalog is vocal, you see. So often the text is the architecture, as you can understand. But when I'm writing a purely instrumental work, I conceive of it in a structural, architectural way as an overview. And then when I feel it's time to write, I sit down and I write. And I write very, very fast. My first drafts. The Passion of Yeshua is 100 minutes long. I wrote it in 30, I wrote an entire, very nicely notated short score with all the instrumentation in 37 days. An American Requiem is 63 minutes. I wrote the entire short score very neatly, very clear in 22 days. You know, my cello concerto for my first of two cello concertos for Yo-Yo Ma was written in an emergency visit to Yaddo. I wrote the entire short score in 17 days. It's half an hour. But what I do is even though I write fast, I finish slow. It took me an entire year to finish an American Requiem after that short score, because I was working like a fiend on details. It took me 18 months to finalize the Passion of Yeshua after I had the short score that I wrote in 37 days. Do you understand?
Of course, but you were working on other things simultaneously, and you would go back to it periodically?
Sometimes not. When I wrote, you know, when I was writing Margaret Garner, I wrote lots of things in between because I just needed a break from it. When I wrote an American Requiem, right in between part one and part two, I wrote my fourth string quartet. In between the Passion of Yeshua, between part one and part two, I needed a little bit of a break. So I stopped and I wrote four piano pieces, you know, so that happens. But that's just to give me a breather, you know, to give me some perspective. But the bottom line in all of this is I work fast, but I finish slow. It's not unlike the way Puccini worked. He had all of the notes of Bohème in 6 months in a piano vocal score.
Piano vocal, but then
It took him 2.5 years to finish it.
orchestrated?
Just because the piano vocal was just a working short score, right? He had his short score in 6 months, but it took him 2.5 years to finalize the entire score with orchestration and everything. And the last 10 minutes took him a year.
Well, at least you know what you're doing and it's working for you, you know.
Thank God. I'm just, you know, I have to say, one of the most important things, I mean, so many of my dearest friends are no longer here. You know, I lost Marvin Hamlish, who was really like a member of my family. Dearest, one of my best friends. I lost him in 2012. I lost Maya Angelou, who was like my surrogate grandmother, in 2014. And then in 2019, Toni Morrison, and then later Jesse Norman. You know, I mean, it's just been this steady stream of people that I felt very close to throughout my life who have gone. And so that makes me feel extraordinarily, unbelievably grateful just to get another. I mean, you know, when I woke up today, Harold, I thought, thank you for giving me another crack at this. You know,
Great.
Thank you for giving me another day to write music.
Well, maybe you'll be like Elliot Carter, and except you can't conceive of writing a piccolo part if you're composing it at age 103, because Elliot stopped writing for piccolos because he had this giant score paper and he couldn't reach the piccolo line, so he decided I won't use piccolos. He couldn't stand up.
Very sweet. But I mean, the thing is, I feel that I do have some work left to do.
Yeah, good.
And this opera that I'm writing is a dark comedy with a very tender ending. And I wrote the libretto myself.
Good for you. Wow.
I wrote it in the wee hours of the morning in April and May because I couldn't go back to sleep. I would wake up at 2 a.m. and I'd be up till 5. And after a few days of this, I thought, let's get busy living or get busy dying. And this was after my doctor had told me, because of my asthma, that my chances of surviving COVID were about 30%. And that really sent me into a kind of a well of anxiety. The only thing that was able to get me to sleep, Harold, was listening to Simona Dinnerstein's Bach. And eventually what happened is I started envisioning an idea for a 15 movement cycle for piano that deals with what we're going through now with the pandemic in this country, and paying tribute to the heroes who've struggled and prevailed and in some cases not survived. And as I was sort of daydreaming that idea in my mind, I wanted to thank Simona, and I got in touch with the director of the Oregon Bach Festival, who I remembered had hosted Simona Dinnerstein the day after I left Oregon, after The Passion of Yeshua had premiered in July of 2018. So I asked him for her email and I wrote her a fan letter and I said, P.S., I've got an idea I'd like to talk to you about. We met on FaceTime. She loved the idea. A week later, the Oregon Bach Festival commissioned the piece. It was titled An American Mosaic. It's almost an hour long of 15 movements for piano, and it's being released on March 26th.
Wow, good for you.
So I guess I've learned in this horrific year a little bit about taking a crate of lemons and making some lemonade.
Yeah, exactly. Good for you. Very quickly, I know you have to go. I'll ask one more question, but I just want to tell you, I met Marvin Hamlish when I was a student at Queens College in the late 60s, and he was the assistant conductor of the Queens College Orchestra.
Yeah, I know he had a very close relationship with Queens College. Yeah.
Just one more question, and if you have to go, tell me, because I'm feeling guilty.
No, please, wait. I've got some time. I've got a little time. I got about 10 minutes.
All right, great. Now, do you conduct yourself? And if not, are there times when you wished you had conducted a performance of a piece of yours instead of having someone else interpret it?
This is interesting that you mention it. When I was at Juilliard, I thought that I should probably conduct because I was a pretty decent pianist. And I figured that this might be a great way of translating my abilities as a practicing performing musician. And I thought it might also help me to get my works out there. But I was really thinking about doing it because I just loved music, primarily. I realized shortly after studying conducting, first with Ben Zander in Boston, and then later with Jacques Monod in
the Queens College professor
in New York, that it took up all the gigabytes in my head. There was no room for writing music. Nonetheless, when I was at Manhattan School of Music, I founded a contemporary ensemble called the Claremont Ensemble. And for 10 years, I either conducted or coached performances for that series, which involved 4 concerts a year. Mm-hmm. And so I and then there was actually one very funny episode where, I can do this if I have to. At the very last minute, when Philippe Entremont was stricken with pneumonia and the Vienna Chamber Orchestra, which had commissioned a 20-minute work of mine, a suite of short pieces for chamber orchestra for Philippe's 75th birthday. Philippe Entremont is a great dear friend of mine for many years. They said, Philippe can't travel to the US for this tour. Will you please conduct your piece? for this tour. And if you want, you can conduct the Mozart concerto as well that's on the program. And they said, we'll do the Beethoven second on our own without a conductor. But if you can conduct the first half of the program, we'd be grateful. You know, I ended up conducting my own work, a few performances of it, and I loved it. It was crazy, though, because you have to go back with a wholly different set of skills and look at your music as if it was somebody else's work, you know?
Right.
It didn't matter a fig of difference, you know, that I had written this work. I was approaching this work as if it was another composer, which is what I would do. And but the works that I conducted at Manhattan School at the Claremont Ensemble were actually never my work. It was always other composers.
Right.
You know, always and actually almost always American composers.
Good for you. Probably you met on Claremont Avenue, which was right around the corner from Manhattan School. Is that why it was called the Claremont Ensemble?
You know, that was the idea of Richard Adams, who was the dean, because Manhattan School is located on Claremont Avenue, exactly. But you know, I had a lot of fun doing it. Would I want to do it again? Hell no. I've got way too much to do. It's sort of the same question I get. You know, they say, you're a pretty good pianist. Do you ever want to go back and perform your own music? No way. There's so many wonderful people who can do it for me. Why would I want to do this when I could be spending that time writing another work?
There's only one of you, and right. You need to spend.
I remember my piano teacher was Lauren Hollander, who I moonlighted with even when I was at Juilliard, you know, and at NEC. And he said, you know, don't waste your time learning all these complex works. He said, you're going to have an entire battalion of pianists that will offer to be your hands for you. He said, no one will be able to write what you write. Just let us be your hands for you.
That's a great story to end on. I'm so inspired by you. And
you've been so kind, Harold. Thank you.
My pleasure. Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing this.
Please take care of yourself in these difficult times, and good luck with the second vaccine. You'll be getting yours presumably just after I get mine, I think.
Before, because I had the Pfizer, so I'm getting mine next week.
Oh, good. Very good.
And then I wait a few weeks, and then I see my grandkids. I'll still have my mask on, but you know, I'll
be careful. Yeah,
I will.
Be careful. Okay. It's great to see you. It's so wonderful to see you again. Truly. My pleasure. Likewise. All right. Let's stay in touch. This is my pandemic non-haircut. I think it's great. I think it's great. You look like Franz Liszt. Yeah, I can read the score just like him. That's great. Please take care. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.